Story 1. Just recently, my multimillionaire boss was complaining about the cost of sending his daughter to boarding school in the United States, $70,000 a year, saying it was unfair for Europeans because we pay much higher taxes than Americans. He knows my annual gross salary, for which I work very, very hard, is a bit less than 1 year of tuition. Story 2. Just buy the place you're renting so you don't waste your money and turn a profit, said the chief executive officer of my job, who was pulling in a pension from his government job and 2 part-time salaries from the 2 positions he held. When I said how could I afford that, he asked if he wasn't paying me enough. I said no, and he left my office. Story 3. My boss, who makes $300,000 or more, said we should be grateful for them cutting some of our holiday pay because, legally, they don't have to give us any. I'm quitting as soon as I can find another job. Story 4. You work too hard. That's why you're so stressed. You need to take a vacation and relax in Italy for a week or 2. Why didn't I think of that? I'll just go shake some money off my money tree and be on the next flight. Story 5. I had a friend whose son got convicted of homicide. Another friend tried to empathize by saying that his son got a speeding ticket and he didn't know what to do about it. The first man said, "Pay the ticket and hug your son." Then he left. Story 6. We just have our cook make it. He was an out-of-touch rich kid who bragged about being wealthy to the point that his wallet was stolen 4 times. His twin sister is completely normal. But I think he's weird because his family either named their restaurants after him or named him after their restaurants, so it's like their whole business is for him. Story 7. Grew up in a broken home. Parents couldn't stand each other. Father came to visit one weekend when my sister was out being a teenager. Dad says right to my face, "Well, there's no point being here if it's just you." Needless to say, I think I've realized where my lack of self-worth stemmed from. Story 8. Why can't they just pay their credit card debt with their money? I went to a top private school. We were all wealthy. At least my parents gave me some sense of empathy and understanding of the world for others. She couldn't understand why people were in debt, and I had to explain they didn't actually have money to begin with. Story 9. In high school, I was called out of class to my guidance counselor's office, where my mom was waiting to break the news that my best friend had been killed the night before in a car crash. I'll never forget the blank stare that the guidance counselor gave me while I was in the middle of a total meltdown as she asked, "I take it this is someone you knew?" "No, lady. Never heard of them until today. This is just how I react every time somebody dies. I'm what you might call an extreme empath." Story 10. When I told my boss that my dad has cancer and we are waiting for staging, she reassured me that it is better he die quickly and not from dementia, as her best friend's parent has it, and it was worse than cancer. I told her that comment was not helpful at this time at all. Story 11. I was telling my boss how proud I was that my husband got a new job. He's legally blind. And she proceeds to tell me that she wishes she had a disability so she could just get handed a job. I had to walk away from that one. Story 12. I was traveling through a particularly poor part of the United States with some hippie friends on a hippie bus. I do not consider myself a hippie. The people who lived there had tin sheets and pallets and other, basically junk materials put together to make their homes. As someone who didn't grow up with a whole lot of money, though not as bad as this, I was feeling a bit down about seeing the situation. There was a woman on the bus who was very well off because of her parents. She looked out the window with a fairly disgusted look on her face and said, "I don't understand why people live like this." Everyone on the bus looked at her as someone said, "They probably don't exactly have a choice." It was fairly quiet for a while. Story 13. I went to a nice private school that had a new policy for financial aid that went to anyone whose household made less than $80,000 per year. This girl rolled her eyes and said, "Who makes that little?" Story 14. At a wedding I attended back in my 20s, this person grew up with 4 homes, one internationally. After he and his brother moved out, the parents built another home, a 10-bedroom house, each with its own full bathroom, on the edge of a golf course. It had a gym, wine cellar, sauna, room with a full bar, pool table, roulette table, poker table, etc. And get this, a room with one of those golf simulators, despite literally living on the golf course, which they could use year-round. A couple of direct quotes from people at our table just to set the scene. "I'm planning to buy my wife and me a plane. I proposed to my girlfriend at a castle I rented in Europe. I think my next plastic surgery will be something specific. Apparently, the bridal party took a 3-minute limo ride to the clubhouse where the wedding was. At the ceremony, there was a 15-minute fireworks show. The whole thing probably cost $500,000. During dinner, one of the parents gave a speech, and believe it or not, they said, "I'm so proud of these two. They've had nothing handed to them in life and have worked so hard to get to where they are today. I still haven't picked my jaw up off the floor." Story 15. When I moved to a new area, I joined a women's group at a church to try to make some friends. I really loved the women there, but the woman who led it was in her 50s and definitely living a different reality from everyone there. One day, a woman who had been coming had an absolute breakdown and shared the absolute hell that had been the last year of her life. She left an abusive marriage that included a situation where the abuse led to her hospitalization, was currently a single mother of 3 kids, was full of self-doubt and struggling with financial issues, and her ex-husband was harassing her and fighting her in court for custody. The rest of us were listening and being supportive. However, our leader interrupted her story to say the following: "Oh, I completely understand what you are going through. My husband and I fight sometimes too, but we always make sure we apologize right away. Sounds like you weren't doing that. And pray about it. Jesus will heal your marriage. Your kids need their father." When people in the church ask, "Why do people judge us so harshly?" 100% this. Story 16. Germany helps all its homeless people. The only people there who are homeless are so because they get more benefits that way. Yeah, I'm sure the guy who slept in the park in the cold did so because he prefers it to a government-provided apartment. Story 17. 2 of my coworkers, who lived at home with their wealthy surgeon families throughout college and still haven't moved out, have never paid a single bill in their lives. They work 6 to 8 hours a week for spending money, were gifted their new luxury cars, and don't buy their own food. They say that anyone our age, between 25 and 30, who doesn't at least have a $20,000 emergency savings account is being irresponsible with their money. Story 18. There are plenty of examples in politics, but one that immediately comes to mind is this particular person who was against free school lunches because hunger is a relative term and has apparently never met a hungry person. Story 19. I was looking for a new car after my last one was totaled by a drunk driver. I had some money in savings so I could buy an old clunker. My sister asked in all seriousness why I didn't buy a car new off the lot. This is also the woman who threw a tantrum because I made boxed macaroni and cheese instead of baked macaroni with multiple types of cheeses, even though I was a full-time working student. I still despise baked macaroni and cheese due to this. Story 20. That poor people ride coach in planes. I suppose anyone who cannot afford plane tickets probably does not qualify as human to the person I heard say that. Story 21. I grew up mostly on a single parent's salary, on the poorer side of comfortable. But I never felt more like a street urchin than when I went to college. Many of my better-off friends made remarks about my old laptop, not having a smartphone in the mid-2010s, or qualifying for work study. As a sophomore, I lived with one of these friends in an on-campus apartment. Near the end of the school year, I was trying to take stock of what I needed to pack up and bring home. I remembered that I brought a set of ice cube trays, but there were 2 in the freezer, one your standard plastic kind that you'd pick up at the grocery store. The other essentially the same but with a pair of handles that helped unload the ice. I have an aunt who collects cute kitchenware and she gave me a lot of stuff that I still have to this day, so I wouldn't have been surprised if she gave me the tray with the handles. I asked my roommate if she knew which ones I brought, and in the next breath she said, "The crappy ones." Honestly, I couldn't care less about the quality of my ice cube trays. I also don't like confrontation, and especially back then I avoided it. But in just as much time as it took her to criticize my stuff, I replied, "You didn't have to say it like that." Shocked that I said something, my friend immediately tried backpedaling and started saying, "Well, no, I meant mine are complicated." Like she was trying to make my ice cube trays out to be the superior ones. I know it's really trivial and it sounds stupid to be upset about, but that's one of those things that still sticks with me today. Story 22. My granddad to my mom when we drove 1,200 kilometers to visit them. My mom said it was a long trip. He replied, I didn't ask you to come visit me. After 6 years, we don't have any plans to ever come back there. Story 23. When I was in my 20s, I had already gotten out of the army, was working 3 jobs and going to school. Yeah, Dad, I was riding the short bus to the special school for behavioral issues. Vans aren't going to load themselves. Story 24. A man who was paying me $12 an hour told me not to bother fixing my car and instead buy a new one because my time was worth $20 an hour. When I pointed out he was only paying me $12 an hour, he said, "Are you being ungrateful?" Story 25. In college, I had 3 roommates and one hated the other for the most trivial things, one of which was that he just watched sports. On September 12, 2001, she said she was kind of glad the terrorist attacks happened because then he couldn't watch sports for a few days. It was at lunch and everyone got up and moved to another table, leaving her there to marinate with her thoughts. Story 26. We are calling in an attempt to collect a debt. Can't you ask a friend or family member to loan you the money? If I had friends or family with money to loan me, would I have gone into debt in the first place? Story 27. My grandma, regarding Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, said, "We don't need this. What this country needs is a Charter of Responsibilities." When I asked what the residents of Canada need to be more responsible for, she just said everyone needs to stop smoking. She wasn't even senile yet. Story 28. It was really dark in there, and I'm not talking about lighting a family member referring to a black-owned restaurant in town. I was like, you can't just say things like that. Story 29. I used to work a pretty physical job for a very out-of-touch business owner. She was pretty notorious for walking by us as we were all sweating and working hard, and saying things like, "Well, at least you won't have to go to the gym today. Yeah, how lucky. That's going to save me a ton of time." Story 30. My old roommate once said to me, "I don't understand why people can make fun of me for being rich, but I'm not allowed to make fun of them for being poor." Story 31. I accepted that some people really don't know what they're saying. A coworker of mine was also going through a divorce. He asked who left, and I said, "Well, me." It got really abusive and scary, so I had to suddenly leave to save my life. And he goes, "You're lucky," because he and his ex grew out of touch and they left. I just stared at him blankly. Story 32. I was in philosophy class in college, 19 years old. I was put into a group for a class activity where we had to discuss reasons to believe in a higher power or not, without using religious texts as an example. As the resident agnostic, I was happy to explain to my classmate, who was this private school girl who would just say, "But Jesus died for us," which missed the point. At some point, I mentioned Muslims. I can't remember why or in what way, but I will always remember her response. About Muslims, they worship Buddha, right? She wasn't trolling. Story 33. I'm in a deeper depression after losing my pregnancy. I have suicidal thoughts. So which gloves do you think I should choose? My cousin and best friend at the moment, when we met for the first time after I lost my baby. That was the last time I spoke to her a dozen years ago. Story 34. I lived in an area and went to school with a lot of wealthy kids, but my family didn't have a lot of money. One time I was staying at a friend's house and she had a really nice MacBook and I said I wish I had one and she was like, "Just ask your parents for one for Christmas." Most Christmases, I barely got any presents because we couldn't afford it. Story 35. School principal. Please don't prop that door open because if a shooter got in, I would be out of a job. I'm ashamed I didn't think about the door in relation to student safety, but holy moly, lady. Story 36. My dad asked me if he should break up with his girlfriend. His reason: she went home to be with her son and daughter-in-law, who just had a miscarriage, and wasn't texting him enough. Story 37. I was struggling with postpartum depression when my daughter was an infant. I was sharing with my dad that I was having a hard time, to which he said I was prematurely retired being a stay-at-home mother. Story 38. I lost my son when pregnant at 27 weeks. He lived a day. The following year, I had a healthy baby girl. She died when she was 2 from an accident. A friend of mine at the time, during the funeral, said to me, "God is trying to tell you something. You shouldn't have children." I was in shock. I never spoke to her again. Story 39. Me to my manager. Working in this field, I will never be able to afford to buy a home in this county. My manager. I've heard stories of members of the community rallying together to help buy a house for someone who was going to have to move away. Story 40. To my daughter, age 22 and earning $25,000 a year. Have you thought of getting a mortgage and buying a house rather than renting? My daughter. Let me know if you see anything on Rightmove for $100,000 within a 30-mile radius. Auntie Sandra. Story 41. My fiancé is in law school. I used to hang out with several of his classmates. I wish I could tell you it was an exaggeration, but genuinely most of the things that came out of the mouths of law students are at times agonizingly out of touch. Some that I remember off the top of my head. Insurance payments don't cost that much. So why should the insurance company cover everything? But it's not hard to work while you go to school. If you have a lot of student loans, it's your fault. This law school doesn't allow its students to work during the semester. I'm not going to say my ancestors were bad just because they owned slaves. It wasn't that bad. Said in the Museum of Civil Rights by an old money plantation baby.